Studio.
Hello, Goofy Goobers. I figured today we could do just a really fun little video. I wanted to include this in sort of my like 2026 updates, but I didn't get the chance to, so I figured we could discuss 2026 drawing revelations. The revelations are pretty simple. I'm still gesture drawing, and I still refuse to use 3D applications in drawing. Wise? Probably not. But what do I always say? Do as I say, not as I do. I figured I would show you just really quickly. So this is my, all the way on the right, is a commission that I did recently. It took about 4 hours and 9 minutes. And you can see in the middle, there's a 25-minute basically the entirety of the body sketch using my original image that I did for the commission as a reference. So like these are all retroactive redraws because I was like, you know what, I do want to like upload a little something, you know, talking about some art that I did this year. And all the way on the left, so this is what I'm going to show you today. This was basically like a really quick, the usual, okay, gesture draw. It took 6 minutes and 22 seconds. I think that I'm gonna play it for you in real time. And you'll see some very, I guess, like staple sort of habits that if you've been watching me draw for a while, you'll recognize. Specifically like, oh my god, drawing the body part as not part of the composition and then lassoing it and like dragging it into place. That kind of tricks my brain into understanding proportions sometimes. I am somebody that like I've talked about this, okay? I pre-stress myself out before I even start drawing. I'm just like perma-stressed. So that helps me unstress a little bit. For the sake of this example, I did use like again, these are retroactively drawn. So we're gonna use the comm as our reference image. And this isn't like a formal, like, here's how to sketch video. It's truly just, I thought it would be like fun to upload. I guess you could think of it almost as a little like art progress. I've tried so many sketching styles over the last like 3-ish years. And I've also tried so many drawing applications, but I'm gonna be real with you. I still enjoy a good gesture draw, and I still enjoy Procreate. I think Procreate is my favorite, at least for like my normal illustrations. I've also been having a really good time coming up with new brushes, and also working in black and white, which we'll get to there eventually. But I just figured this could be like a fun little romp through gesture drawing. So I hope you enjoy. It's gonna be a really quick video. I filmed this with the intention of, again, adding it to the 2025 sort of recap, but I didn't want it to be longer than it already was. So hopefully you enjoy this, and I'll walk you through the best that I can. So let's do it. Okay, so obviously I started by importing my own commission, which is my reference drawing, and we're gonna focus on the torso. I do this sort of like exaggerated 3/4 like sticking out curvy torso a lot. I've noticed that I do it a lot, so I thought it would be fun. And I love drawing hands. I love giving hands a big claw. So as you can see here, I am starting in sort of an unconventional place. I think that's something else that I like to do. Sometimes I like to draw like from the bottom up, or just like the top half sort of the person, and then all of a sudden just like shove in a leg in the middle of my composition. It really is my way of like trying to unstress myself. Yeah, and I also like, I like sort of ball jointed doll anatomy drawing. It does make life a lot easier, because you can smooth that out later into just like, let's say you want to like wrap your head around like, okay, how does a forearm connect to a hand? You can add that little joint like it's a ball jointed doll, and then just smooth over it, and then there you go. You pretend that it's literally the ball, sort of like the end ball sort of shape of a forearm bone. So as you can see here, I'm figuring out the torso. Torsos, some torsos have a lot of lumps and bumps, some don't. I will sometimes add rolls where anatomically there necessarily aren't always rolls there, but I like to add them. It gives compositions a little je ne sais quoi. Something that I like to keep in mind, I guess, volume-wise, is when placing sort of rolls and the belly button, you have to think a little bit about, like, the distribution of human, like, fat. Incidentally, speaking of things with volume, I had a really good time, like, turning the joints into these, like, mechanized pieces and these, like, computer wires and stuff. It's really quick and easy to do. Like just with a technical pen, like you don't even need an under sketch or anything. And if you just follow the curvature of like the ball joints, it makes your life even easier. Because if you want to throw in a gear or something, you know, you don't really have to like remap where a gear would go. It's kind of like pre-given to you. Something else that is helpful for proportions, I find, is clothes. Even if it's just like the littlest piece of fabric, like the bottom of our little jester hood here kind of has like a fabric flap. And with that fabric flap, the way that I like conceptualize it is once you find the underboob, the amount of underboob under the flap, the rest of the torso will make sense. Because realistically, like a torso wouldn't actually bend like this unless you did like an extreme isolation of your ribs. So maybe for like a belly dancer you could bend your torso in this way, but realistically it wouldn't really bend this way, right? I'm just doing it because like I think it looks cool. But yeah, a little fabric sometimes I find helps sort of like orient you. And like recently I did a poll on Discord, sort of asking people, like, for bases, if they wanted me to include more volume, and a lot of people said that they would appreciate more, like, shapes, and I understand, because I think a lot of people, again, draw sort of in 3D, so instead of, like, for example, the way that I do my forearms, you'll notice, right, it's always the same shape. And the reason is because I've just like muscle memory trained myself to always start off bulbous, like where the middle of your elbow like joint would be, and then just taper down the middle to the end. I'm not really thinking about it as a 3D shape, but most people in there would insert like a cylinder. So again, the doll proportions are helpful. I think if you think of breaking up the body into shapes. Whereas I have a very two-dimensional approach to drawing things. Like you'll notice I'm basically, in recreating the image that I already drew, I'm copying the lines. I'm not so much copying the voluminousness of like specific shapes. And this was only really pointed out to me like after I started posting to the internet. And I was like, oh yeah, look at that. I guess I really don't think in 3D. And I've talked about this before, like if ever you're trying to really nail a pose and you're like, something's not looking right, there's nothing stopping you from overlapping your sketch against the reference picture. I have a bad habit of drawing really thin and narrow, and I find sometimes that I need to actually like space things out and basically artificially like widen them with the lasso tool. Because you can see like there's a mistake, right, in the thinness sort of my recreation. The issue here being that there's a bit of like a width and tilt mistake, but it's not so bad. So yeah, the 6-minute 22-second one, you know, it's not necessarily perfect, but it's not terrible either. I think in many ways it's better than the 25-minute one. And I guess that might just be me. Sometimes when I have to look at something for an extended period of time, I get so, I guess, embroiled in, wanting to be perfect that it ends up looking worse because I can't stop myself from changing it. Even in art college, I really struggled to think sort of in 3 dimensions, and I wonder if it's maybe my dyslexia. I struggle with dyscalculus. I can't picture numbers, and I always had a hard time in geometry sort of picturing shapes. I get very overwhelmed by trying to imagine shapes. So I did the worst in sculpture, traditional painting, and we had a drawing technique class that was just focused on volume and shape, and also space, the planes of, you know what I mean, something in the foreground and the background and the midground. I always had a hard time because I couldn't, I understood conceptually what I was being told, but I couldn't picture it. And I only really realized that I draw in this weird 2-dimensional way after other people pointed it out to me, and I was like, oh shit, yeah, I guess that is what I do. But at the same time, it begs an interesting question, right? Do we have to strictly adhere to the conventions of sort of traditional mathematical art? I think the answer is no. I think you should do whatever you want. I've always been of the opinion that even the most serious classical of arts is inherently kind of silly and fun, because, that's what art is, right? People sit around and they want something to do and they derive pleasure from this thing. And I guess just how I feel a need to I have to overcomplicate things if I look at it too long. Sometimes people get really bogged down in overcomplicating art, and it really does siphon the joy. Sorry, you're gonna hear Moomy in the background. It siphons the joy from creation. So I think sometimes, it's okay to just have a silly, goofy time and do what feels comfortable. For me, that really is gesture drawing. Yeah. So that's it. My reflections, I suppose, in terms of sketching are that not much has changed. But something interesting that has changed is I've noticed my muscle memory is a lot better. I've gone back into drawing on paper recently. Post-hysterectomy, because my arthritis is better, there's been a lot less impediments to drawing on paper, specifically in terms of stability of my wrist and finger joints. I've been getting back into it. I'll actually throw up an image here really quickly, and I'm noticing that my muscle memory is crazy. I can draw things faces or heads without really having to think about it too hard, because the motion is just ingrained. And I think that that's something that really only comes with constant repetitive drawing, which, to be fair, from an art career perspective, is basically what I've been doing for 3 years now, is just constant repetitive drawing. And I've talked about muscle memory before, and I think it's really important that everybody develops their drawing muscle memory. So, we'll count that as a win. That's a bit of a positive change, I suppose. I don't know if it's a conscious positive change, but it is a change. Now, that having been said, okay, here's a redraw. You can see where I basically stole the eyes off of a different drawing and grafted them on. You can also see that underneath I have my original drawing set to a lower opacity, and there's a lot of voluminous stuff going on here for a couple reasons. Reason number one was that the original sketch, which I'll show you in a second, the original sketch of this basically used volume to suggest more weight. So when I lined it, there was more sort of weight and volume around the butt and the back of the legs to show sort of a more exaggerated lean. But if you're looking at the line of motion, you'll notice that it funnels down into the feet, which, because I do love a bulbous shoe, are already pretty bulbous in general. So like, we have to exaggerate that line of motion. If you think about it in terms of real life for a second, right? Sort of the least visible and kind of smallest section would be the midsection. Because if we're like pointing ourselves with our butt all the way back, we're sort of like in a bit of a triangle shape, right? A triangle on its side, where the top of the triangle is going to be our belly button. It's the most sucked in. It's the least visible like part. The most visible part is going to be the chest and the head, because they're the things that are like pushed the most forward. If you sort of aggressively fold your body in half, like if you like picture yourself being crumpled ass first into a black hole and somebody takes a picture, the last, like the most obvious thing and the last thing that is going to stick out to you is going to be the head. But for the sake of like the drawing and sort of being able to see the curvature of the overalls, we're actually looking at more of the midsection than we would be seeing. There would be more sort of overlap of like the top overall flap over the like where the thighs meet the pelvis. Like if you crumple yourself, like I said, in half, you'll notice it. But then the other thing is that like this pose isn't really achievable because we would fall over, right? You have one leg doing an internal rotation, you have another leg doing a straight rotation, so you're like immediately pigeon-toed. So basically, the way to express this pose in an effort to make it make sense is that even though in real life this would kind of topple you over, our head and our feet are like level. And then so usually if I'm drawing something where like the top half of a character is more visible, even though in real life it would be heavier, you need more of a taper. Your feet are technically the littlest thing. This is a really popular like anime and manga pose. You have for sure seen it before. But if you think about it realistically, it doesn't really work. So how do you suggest volume in a pose that we purposely have sort of undone the realistic like volume and proportions of the body? It's the lines. And this is where my like weird 2D brain comes in, because not only do I not give a shit about the volume, I'm not really worrying about the volume. I'm trying to stick to my two lines of motion, which are that triangle shape on its side and that taper where the feet are the smallest. And that's really all I'm thinking about. And it is easier to think about it in a two-dimensional sense, because lines can be thickened later. Do you know what I mean? If I have to sort of like contend with real human tissue and gravity, it makes sort of these unbelievable poses almost undoable. So there's a fork in the road here. Do we want to strictly adhere to realism, or do we want to push proportions to their most extreme? I would argue that generally, if you're doing something anime related, you're gonna push the proportions to the most extreme. I still think it's important to know like your actual proportions in order to push them. You can't start off super wonky and then learn how they function in real life later. You kind of have to start off knowing how proportion functions, and then you can like mess with it to achieve sort of like a wonky effect, especially in terms of like having poses that are just not doable by the human body, one of which is this one. If you really look at her, she's like floating in space, right? Neither of her feet in that pigeon-toed sort of like internal rotation position would be completely on the ground. So there technically would be nothing supporting her. It's almost like she floats, but when we look at the composition, our brain sort of tricks us into like knowing, quote unquote, that she's standing. But in reality, like I was saying before with the crumpled into a black hole example, you would have to kind of like jump into the black hole butt first in order to really like achieve this position. If we look at the original sketch, okay, so this is my original sketch for the line of motion, you'll notice actually that there's gonna be a fun little mistake coming up. So once everything is placed, right, I'm keeping that sort of like dynamic pose where we're bent in half at the waist. What you may notice though is that by having these bulky clothes, we're losing essentially the section of the bend at the midsection that explains why we have a weird foot rotation. And ultimately, I'm losing my taper from the hips down to the feet. So everything kind of looks like it's the same volume from the hips up. And this is a mistake for a few reasons, but most notably, even though like I'm working with wonky proportions on purpose to give a dynamic pose, its dynamicness, I am not, like, the weights are all uniform. So like I was saying before, instead of having a head that stands out and feet that are tapered, and then the midsection really is what solidifies the main line of motion, you don't have that because everything is one size. Essentially no amount of shading can fix lines and volume that are in the wrong place. And you'll notice here, like, as I line and ultimately as I shade in grayscale, there's, like, you can see where I've put the effort in to sort of re-solidify the line of motion, which is what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned, like, thickening lines to give a heavier appearance. It kind of sort of works on the right, like, making the lines thicker all the way in the back gives the impression that there's, like, weight being thrust towards the back, which ultimately is kind of the point of this pose. But still, because the front part of the dress sort of is so poofy that it droops so much, you essentially lose the shape of the midsection. So this is interesting because it's sort of an accidental wrong application of volume, and it only really occurred to me after I had shaded it, because I was like, no matter how much I change the line weights, I can't change the line weights meaningfully enough if you can't see the curvature of the body. So I ended up just redrawing into the little alien girl because these clothes on this pose were just never gonna work. The poof has too much volume. It makes her very front heavy. So it's a good mistake in the sense of learning, but it's also a very classically me mistake in the sense of, like, it being kind of a stupid mistake. I'm a big fan, obviously, of playing with line weights. I've made a whole YouTube video about it, but you can't quite line weight your way out of, like, poor anatomy. And in this case, it's not so much the anatomy of the human body, but the anatomy of the clothes. In this time lapse, like, you can see my inspo picture. It's just the wrong outfit for having a character with an exaggerated bend. The overalls are better because overalls and jeans have a cut, right? Like at your waistline or your hip line, which helps you to accentuate where somebody's waist would go. It's like wearing, like, tight, high-waisted jeans. Like, you can really see where the jeans are, like, cutting the person at the midpoint of their torso. You can see how the clothing helps us to emphasize the shape, and you'll probably also notice I've thinned out the limbs. Having sort of a stocky character in bigger clothes makes everything look stocky. So to resolve that problem, I've made the limbs in the redraw a lot longer, and you can see that the line weights, they really haven't changed that much, in the sense that, like, the emphasis is still on the backmost part of the character to give the illusion of additional weight. But you'll notice that the less sort of stocky nature and elongated nature of the limbs give us a better sense of the internal rotation of, from the direction that we're looking at it, the right leg, because our knee is higher. And it also gives us a bit of a better sort of indication of where the torso is pointing, because now we can see that the head and the chest are facing us. This is a very twisty and turny and sort of like it's a very wily pose. It's a pose that you can't quite do in person, like I said. You can see that like I have flattened the right foot to sort of anchor us into the ground, which means foreshortening the left leg. But again, seeing as how the knees are now a little higher because the legs are a little more slender, I find that the effect is overall a bit more sort of balanced, and there's less like of a big poofy clothing that's obstructing the torso. I've also removed the hood, which I think helped a lot, because you can keep the hair big and poofy, but you don't run the risk of, again, everything being one sort of volume and one size. So the little red arrow is pointing inwards at the waist. You can see that we've achieved that triangle that I was talking about earlier. And again, like when you gesture draw, the first thing that you capture is sort of a rough line of motion. You basically need to understand the motion that everything is going in order to then proceed to draw it. So in this case, there's actually a few lines of motion. I only used 2 because I only really needed to visualize 2, but there's actually 3 if you really like properly envision the direction that everything is going in. Because technically, the chest and the face are facing us. They sort of have their own like direction, and then again, you have the 2 internal rotations of the thighs. Technically, I guess it's not a line of motion, but I'm counting the tapering as a line of motion. And then obviously you have our triangle shape. I would make the argument that you could even consider the way that the hand kicks out behind a separate line of motion. I think it really depends on you and how you like compartmentalize the way that the human body moves. If it helps you to get real like specific and visualize everything moving independently, then do it that way. But if you were to ask me to identify a line of motion, like if I had 2 seconds to do it, then it would really just be our triangle shape. I wouldn't really be too fussed about like the other parts of the body moving independently, unless, like with the initial sketch with the little bear girl, I realized that there's like a severe impediment to understand, like somebody understanding the direction that all of these body parts that I'm drawing are going, which is what happened here. Like the main quote-unquote fix was that you can't actually tell really where the foreshortening and the lines of motion are when she's wearing the bear costume, because everything is the same volume. It's all just poofy. And again, because I think I have a tendency to go more narrow, in this case, the narrowness was good, because elongating and narrowing everything helps us to sort of push like the perspective of a pose that technically isn't really doable for the human body, which a lot of anime poses, that just kind of is what it is. And I do like poses that are quote unquote like sort of undoable and unnatural. And we can see it here too, right? Like I was saying before, a torso generally doesn't segment into 3 like that unless you have supernatural control over your like upper abs, the middle of your diaphragm, and then the pooch, which most of us won't have. But for the sake of creating a dynamic looking drawing, if you push the belly button outward and segment the torso into 3 pieces, Like, you can tell, even in the really quick 6-minute sketch, that it is a lot more interesting looking, right? Especially to sort of give the idea that this is a very, like, sultry, aloof character. You may, in fact, decide to do that. The characterization of whatever you're drawing has a lot to do with, like, the lines. It's not so much just about, like, something like a color palette or an expression or a pose. Sometimes the wonkier looking the lines are, it also gives us, like, different impressions that a character is themselves maybe a little more wonky, or that they're supernatural in some way, or that they're younger if you thin them out and make their limbs very uniform, or that they're sultry if you're doing one of these over-the-top sort of, like, sultry, curvy poses. You can do a lot, and the decision really lies in how realistic are you concerned with your artwork looking. So again, you can apply every principle of art theory, like, to a T, you know, read as written, but I don't really like to do that. I am having a lot of fun still, just kind of digging around. But again, it's not a guarantee that every experiment is going to be successful. Sometimes, like in this case, you may have to redraw things a couple times to at least communicate the effect that you're going for. In terms of my arch nemesis coloring for this year, I've been getting really into sort of black and white rendering, essentially suggesting volume in, like, monochrome colors, so either like sepia tones or black and white, and then kind of experimenting with a lot of different layer modes. At the moment, I'm experimenting with different line art because I like my line art pretty chunky, but I've been having a lot of fun sort of just doing occlusions, which are like shadows where two things sort of overlap. As you can see, I've been trying painterly style. It's been fun. I don't think I've really settled on anything specific yet. But when I have the time to really sit down and do some and like do one work for multiple hours, I do enjoy doing sort of monochrome. It's definitely come in handy for manga illustration, which, by the way, go read Yokai Parade for free on my website. It's helped me a lot because sticking to black and white coloring it's a little tough because you have to have a really deep understanding of values, which is what I'm trying to figure out now. I've been diving deep into color theory. I'm actually taking some in-person community classes with my oil pastels, and I've been making color wheels, and I've been just like trying to figure out hue and saturation and values, because I haven't done any of those things since college, and I low-key do not remember too much about color theory, if I'm being real honest. Like, I remember the very cursory sort of basics, but it's been a long time since I sat down. Like, I remember in our college, it was, we would use Copic markers, and you had to, like, draw several different sort of, like, cityscapes with just black and white, or just, like, sepia and white. So it's been nice to be able to do that in color, and kind of do it, like, at my own pace while taking, like, actual formal art classes. It's been really nice. And I'd actually like to shout out Spiro. I met Spiro through Mr. Studios, and he is an incredibly talented artist. I'll put his @ in the description box. But he has been helping me to audit my work and improve digitally. He's an amazing painter. I will never be that good, but I do appreciate his input. So yeah, those are kind of my drawing revelations, I suppose. I'm in a bit of a slow period. I haven't really, as you've probably noticed, been cranking out a whole lot of like drawn media content, and the reason is because I'm going through a little renaissance of like skill building, but I still thought it would be fun to kind of talk about like all the ways that my drawing has like both changed and also remained the same. I guess my foundation has like remained the same. So that's my 2026 update. I've tried a lot of new and interesting things so far this year. Everything from brand new styles to different online and in-person courses. I'm getting back into like physical mediums. I'm really loving the oil pastels. I've also been sort of like art studying my own work from 2024 and 2025. There are definitely things that I think I'll leave behind. There are definitely some things that I'm still doing. I think foundationally it's sort of time for a change, but I think personality wise, if I want my art to reflect me, it'll just sort of always change, and the more that you're okay with it, the better your art is. Inevitably, you will go through many different artistic changes and sort of navigate the language of art in different ways and through different phases, and that's okay too. I don't think that I need to commit to one thing forever. If having like a full-time career in the arts has taught me anything, is that that's really counterproductive, and it's also just not good for like the artist's psyche. You have to become okay with these cycles of loving everything and then hating everything and then redoing everything and then relearning and then unlearning. Like, it'll be okay. It's part of the artistic process. So I hope you enjoyed this fun little ramble through 2026 art revelations, and if you want to see what I'm up to in the land of IRL three-dimensional art, I do invite you to check out my website. The link is in my bio and I'll put it in the description as well. I also invite you to check out the free Patreon, where I've been doing my mini craft theaters, where every month we have a new little craft that is everything from fiber arts to animating and beyond. And of course my second channel, Spaz After Dark, where I do all of basically my like IRL crafts and folk crafts, and I have a lot of like really fun stuff coming, so you might be incentivized to check that out. There's some really fun little segments, and I urge you to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Spazzatic Studios Creations on Instagram and at Spazzatic Studio on TikTok, so that you can stay abreast of my adventures. And until next time, friendos, thank you so much for watching. Squingle that bingle, boingle that spoingle, like, comment, and survive.